It's just a little microphone, a little recording device. Okay, that's all.
Yeah, it's a good running gun, so if my wireless one's act up and I'm doing an interview, there we go, just in a pocket, lav there. It's probably the cheapest solution. This is about $100 and this is about $25–30. So for under $150 you have a really solid interview audio recording solution. Only downside is you can't monitor it while you're recording, but it does have an attenuator on it. You can record in WAV or MP3. So yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I've got a 4 right there.
Yeah.
That was the small one. I was like, yours is tiny.
Yeah.
Compared to the one.
Itty bitty.
Yeah, I was going to show that.
So just on the Steadicams, there's another one, like you can make your own home solutions, and I've made it, though they are not as, they do basic job. So you can follow this website, they have all the techniques, and you can get your thing, that it's very easy to make. So just.
Oh, okay, hang on, wait, don't go away yet, so I can show it to the people at home. So what, $14stabilizer.org. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and you can build it on your own. All the stuff you can get from a hardware store, and it's like half an hour with a really good stabilizer.
Okay, thank you. I've been asked to do a little something on sound, and I was watching Curtis. I could bring out equipment too, a lot of equipment, I suppose. You know what a microphone is. There's a couple of different kinds of microphones and boom poles and things like that that are important. The first thing that you have to appreciate with me is that I'm not a sound engineer. I just capture sound. And the reason I came to do to record sound was because, well, I'm cheap because I work for free on these projects, and I often work with Kelly. And there just, in my opinion, weren't very many people around who could do sound. As Curtis mentioned, right, Curtis does all of these productions, and often he has to leave the sound in the hands of someone else, and you have to have a lot of faith in these people. Because if they mess up the sound, they mess up absolutely everything. Imagine flying a guy back from Toronto for a few lines, right? You're always going to make mistakes. It's not easy to do sound. There are lots of challenges and things like that. But I just want you to appreciate that I'm not a sound engineer. I just started recording sound for our own projects, and I went through all of the sort of trials and tribulations that a lot of you will go through. I know that most of you aren't filmmakers, or you might, like me, end up doing a lot on projects that really have no budget. I've worked on big budget productions, and I've hired sound recorders. I don't do the sound editing, so I hire that out. I merely capture sound, and that's really important. I've seen an awful lot of sort of low-end productions that are made maybe in Thunder Bay or elsewhere where the sound ruins it for people. You know, yesterday I showed you engagingtheworld.ca, my little short clips. If the sound isn't clear on one of them, you can handle it, or you can deal with it, and you can tolerate it because it's only going to last 3 minutes maximum. But if the sound isn't good on a half-hour production or 20 minutes or 10 minutes, nobody is going to want to listen to it. And so there are lots of challenges with that. For most of you, I suppose, you'll work with minimal equipment, and this is a great example, right? I mean, you know, camera equipment is really expensive, and what Curtis just sort of showed you was how in a matter of, I think he said 7 years, it went from the Red, which was this giant camera, and he's down to very small equipment that does just as much as the giant camera does for his purposes. And it doesn't mean that people aren't still using much bigger and more expensive equipment. It's just that that's not in his budget bracket. And I would think that a lot of you are going to encounter the same sort of thing. So one of the things that you will learn as filmmakers or sound recordists is that you're probably likely to spend most of your time working on very low budget or no budget films, which means you don't have the luxury of hiring someone. You do it yourself, or you have to get somebody to do sound, but you have to be sure that they're competent. You'll have to also work with minimal equipment, right? I showed you that little zoom that Curtis has, and I brought two pieces of equipment out for you to look at. This is a $2,000 field mixer, and it's got all of the bells and whistles. It's 4-channel, and it's a wonderful item, but it's $2,000. And as you can see, it's not very scruffed up, and that's because technology has advanced. And what it comes with is generally is a bag like this, and you wear it. You've got pockets here where you can put in your cables, right, to hook up your sound, and you've got 4 channels. And this is, great if you've got the time. What was Curtis keeps saying, load and shoot or something like that. Anyhow, this is not the kind of unit that you want to lug up mountains or do many, a lot of projects with. It's great if you've got a much bigger project and you've got a lot of sound issues that you want to, got a lot of microphones, a lot of things that you want to do, and you can bring in 4 feeds to it, which is great. So what I've evolved to, which is bigger than what Curtis has, is a little zoom, and it's the same manufacturer. It's essentially the same technology, only I'm able to monitor my inputs and do many more things that he can't do with his unit. This one's $200, that's $2,000, and his was $100 to do the sound. And I've got 2 inputs. I can put in 1/4-inch or XLR into it. I've got a jack for my headphones. I can control the input volume. The one thing I didn't have was this very expensive quarter brace bag. So I invented my own. I got some piece of plastic, a little bit of foam, and it merely slides in there like that. And it's a little snug, and I can put it around here, and I can put in my 2 cables, and I can monitor everything like this, because you can't be sort of holding it and running around. My hands are free, hands-free. And if I have a boom pole, right, it's all right here, very easy. So this bag is worth probably $250 or something like that, and this is worth, on a good day, $3 or something like that. So this is where I think a lot of you are going to end up, is with a unit like this or similar to this that's cheap, it's durable, and you can understand it. You don't. It's not all that complicated. Every time I pull this or one of these out, I have to reread the manuals, because I can't remember what half the functions are on it or how to make it do the things I want to make it do. So you'll always be working with a minimal amount of, maybe not always, some of you might progress, some of you might be on your way to Hollywood and big productions where you wouldn't even have to worry about all of that. But for the most part, you'll be working on smaller productions, and you'll want to be, just like Curtis said, you'll want to be able to get around and do the kinds of things that you can't do with heavy equipment. I could have brought out a boom pole, but they're all basically the same boom poles. And actually, my first boom pole wasn't a boom pole. I was toying with bringing it because I kept it for nostalgia's sake. Kelly and I went to Central America, and I didn't bring a boom pole with me, and they're quite expensive. I wasn't going to buy one when I was there, but I soon needed a boom pole, so I got a piece of bamboo, and I have a bamboom, and all I did was I fixed a clip on the end of it, and it works just like a boom pole, right? It's not retractable, which is maybe an issue, but I was able to record my interviews, and we recorded directly into the camera for that one, and Kelly monitored the sound, and I merely held the microphone in front of somebody's mouth, while they spoke, and I was able to do those kinds of things. So, you know, what I'm suggesting is that if you spend $14 there and $3 there on a case, you might have a little bit more money left over to buy a little higher end camera, which is really important, a little higher end recording device, which is important, and then the rest of it, a $30 light. You know, it doesn't take that much for you to be able to get slightly better equipment. He had a monopod that was worth $300. It's probably worth well, I'm sure it is, worth every cent that you'd pay for that. You can't easily jerry-rig a monopod, although I did one, or we did one recently. But anyhow, you know, my point is wherever you can cut costs on things like that, you should try to do that, and that'll make it easier for you to have the money you need for the things that really count. When you work with minimal equipment, you also tend to work with people that have a variety of levels and a variety of skills. So you can't always count on your sound person, you can't always count on your lighting person to have the experience that you need. You have to have a lot of faith in people, so you want to make it as simple as you can for them in terms of your shooting. And sound is one of those things. You know, when you're recording sound, well, first of all, you should appreciate, as Curtis sort of hinted at, and I'm not going to single out Curtis as a bad guy, but for the most part, directors really don't care about sound. And so you're the last person after they get the lights, after they set up the camera. Then they say, okay, we're ready to go, but you haven't had a chance to run actors through their lines a little bit to get sound levels and all of that sort of thing. And all the pressure is on you, right, in an interview situation to get your equipment going, because everybody else sort of takes precedence, and you're supposed to step in short order, you know, get the right sound. So there's a lot of pressure on you to do these kinds of things. And you also, in addition to that sort of pressure of being the last person to be consulted or considered on a shoot, you also have to deal with all kinds of things that other people don't necessarily hear, because you have headphones on, and you have to deal with planes, trains, automobiles, refrigerators, radios playing in the background, you name it. People can't necessarily hear it because there's, you know, a lot of noise going on, but once you've got your microphone and you're pointing it in a certain direction, and you can hear very clearly, and you know, you can amplify it, then you pick these things up. What's the problem with the radio? Well, if you're playing a Beatles song, then expect not to be able to include it in your film, because you're going to have to pay for the rights to it, and you could work for a lifetime and never be able to afford, you know, essentially the rights to it, right? So you have to go and find the radio and have them shut it off, beg them, pay them money to shut it off, all kinds of different little tricks, I suppose, to get it done. Refrigerators, we had a shoot here, and the guy made a mistake, unplugged a refrigerator, and the next day had to go back and replace everything that was in the refrigerator, because they were people that certainly couldn't have afforded it. So the trick with refrigerator is put your car keys in it, unplug it, put your car keys in it, and then you'll remember to plug it back in. So you learn a number of little things, but nobody else on the set thinks about it, right? They just want it to happen. They can't hear the refrigerator, but that's your sort of your responsibility. And I say the set, but it's not just the set, it's also when you're recording, excuse me, all kinds of interviews and other projects as well. You want, you know, the kind of sound that you know, that can be used in post-production. So these are all the kinds of challenges that we could talk about here today, but there's always another one, right? So these are the kinds of things that you learn on the go. And if you're going to do sound, then you just have to get a recorder and go out and record things, and learn, take them home and see, you know, what you've been recording and how it works, and play around with the equipment a little bit, and that's basically how you can learn to take more than adequate sound for whatever project you want to do. What I wanted to talk to you about was other challenges that you might have to consider when you're doing sound. One of them that we've encountered is language. I'm of the mind that you should let people speak the language that they're comfortable with, right? So if you're speaking with somebody whose language is not English, you have a certain, you have to deal with it. So they might understand English, you might be able to ask your questions in English and you'll get a response in whatever language that they respond in. But I guess you have to have a little bit of faith that they're actually answering your question. But the important thing is that it's a question of showing respect. It's sound, it's showing respect for the individuals. And then when you think about subtitles, as a French Canadian, for me, it's a bit irritating when I see a film that's produced in Canada shown in France and they have subtitles on what to me is French. And it's sort of, I would argue that it's a bit of a lack of respect for the viewer as much as it is for the production, simply because you're assuming that the viewers can't adjust their ears to understanding that particular accent. And so sometimes, I've seen it, the subtitles are written the way that whoever happens to be writing them thinks they sound, right? So they add accents, if you will, right? Instead of proper English, for example, they will try to give you a sense of what the Louisiana drawl is or something like that. And I think that's just as disrespectful, because listening to somebody's accent, right, that's your interpretation of what they're saying, right? I was talking to some people, a guy up from Duluth, and he was joking about my accent. I don't hear the accent, and I know it was a joke because he has the same accent as I have because he's just from Duluth. But the big joke about Canadian accents, right? And so, but that's just you hearing them, and you're not the person to decide that they have an accent or how they accentuate things and all of that. So you want to be conscious of that. Another challenge so that's one kind of sound challenge. Another thing with taking sound is dealing with oh, sorry. Yes?
I just want to tell you, I had a lot of issues with that, with my productions, and in Quebec, as you may know, they have a lot of, actors and people that make like dubbings, that they call it international French. And they are those that you have to take when you want to do something that goes to France and other places. Because as much as I agree with you, when it's out of Canada, when it goes to another French country, they wouldn't accept it.
I understand that, but
I
let me
just
give
wanna
you
say
another
that.
example.
I just want to say that.
We did this series for TFO, right?
Yeah.
The French version of TVO.
Yeah.
And it was an international series. I forget how many languages we had in the end, but we had at least a dozen languages, from Mandarin to Vietnamese to Urdu to you name it, all around the world. And we were allowed to subtitle, which I think is appropriate, every language except English. So then we had Vandana Shiva. She's a world famous woman. Her English is better than probably anybody in this room. But we had to dub her into French. And this was for an audience in Ontario, where if you don't speak English, you're Francophone and don't speak English in Ontario or understand it enough, there's something really wrong there, because essentially everybody that watches TFO is bilingual and should be able to manage through one little interview with somebody like Vandana Shiva. So it took away from the quality of it, right? So I have these issues, and I understand, the dubbing and all of that.
It's not mine. I was just
Yeah.
surprised to
Yeah.
learn about this
Yeah.
international French system
Yeah.
that exists only in Canada, right?
Yeah,
Like in France, it's not international French, it's French.
right.
And which has got about 20 different accents
Of
in
course.
France.
But of course, the Parisian one,
Right.
you see.
Yeah, they can handle the regional, but not the extra regional. Yes.
Just one other thing. The Korean interviews, like I did the interview in English, and just nod and smile. I think the person was answering in Korean. And it was about a medical issue of HIV/AIDS, and we're talking about protection. They didn't have a word for condom, so the guy was doing the translation for me. He had to make one up. He says, "Well, the closest thing we got is a gun holster where you put your." So we use that.
Well, that is the other thing with translation, right? We don't have those concepts. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was another problem that we encountered. We made a film about a guy that spent 29 years in solitary confinement. And my job was to make this guy. I forgot to mention, we also use the radio mic, so we're using them around here, right? And they're connected to the camera, so there's a microphone, I guess, right here that is picking up what I'm saying, and it's feeding it directly into the camera. It's being monitored there. And they're not that expensive. They're not that expensive to buy, but for a couple of $100 you can get a decent set of them. And they make life a lot easier because people can move around and everything. So I was working with a guy that was not going to, first of all, a guy who's of African descent, a black man from Louisiana, 29 years in solitary confinement for a crime he didn't commit, listening to what he calls free men, telling him when to stand up, when to sit down, spending, being tortured and beaten and, everything horrible. And he, despite a good relationship with him, I could not put a lapel mic on the man. He wasn't going to have any little string that was going to tie him to anything. He wasn't going to let anybody put anything on him, right? And he's, was a hard guy to keep up with. He's in his late 60s, but he's as fit as you could possibly imagine because all he had to do was exercise in a cell and things like that. And I had to be creative in the way that I mic'd him. So I took the little mic that goes with that, and I found myself a little stick, a little boom pole, and we walked around, with this little sort of extension thing because I couldn't touch, I couldn't touch his person, right? And the same would apply in some cultures to women. Like for me, I can't put a mic in any culture on a woman in the place where I need to put it, which is, on their chest, right? I mean, it's just not acceptable, so you have to work with people. But I'm just bringing that up as, an example of the challenges that are not technical challenges, but are other challenges. Kelly worked on or made a film about somebody that rode across the Atlantic. We had a GoPro and we had a small Sony camera, and there was a question of how do you mic all of this? Well, you don't mic it. So you have to deal with, poor quality audio, and it worked and it doesn't work, and it had to be subtitled in a few places because, when the waves are 20 feet high and crashing over the boat, you can't really hear conversations all that well. And anyhow, you had to work around it, and in the end, it worked with the film, and it worked reasonably well. The sort of final thing, because there's, the list is endless, is intimacy. We often work just as a team, two people, camera and sound, but even at two people, sometimes that's not intimate enough for the discussion that's taking place. And one thing I've learned taking sound is not to watch or look at the subjects too much. I mean, you have to keep an eye on what they're doing, if they're going to shift their head or something like that. But don't make eye contact with them because they'll start relating to you and not to the camera or wherever else they should be looking. But the other thing is that sometimes they're talking about things that are really quite personal. And you have to, like if somebody's talking about something, if they start crying or something like that in an interview, you as a part of the team that is recording this, you've got to be in tune with what's going on so that you're not doing something inappropriate, smiling when you shouldn't be smiling, or laughing, or I guess worst case scenario. And sometimes it's just worthwhile to put the mic sort of down or on them and walk away and just leave one person in the room and let them tell their story, just because even though it's going to be edited and maybe broadcast and all of that sort of thing, in the moment, you have to be sensitive to people and whether or not, your presence is somehow affecting the interview. And those are the challenges of sound. So you have to adapt, right? You have to adapt with a bam-boom if necessary. You have to adapt with my portable, my little bag. And a number of other things that you learn, because sometimes you have to mic maybe under people, over people, behind people. Depends, a music video is different, with people on stage or in a bar is different to mic than an intimate conversation with people. And so, you spend a lot of time thinking about how best to capture what you can capture. It'll never be 100%. Because there's always a challenge, but the problem with it is, and the same with recording with a camera, is that if you miss it, you miss it. right? If they won't say the same thing, even if you ask them to repeat it, they won't say it the way that, necessarily the way that you heard it the first time. And then if you forget to press record or something major like that, it's not easy to go back for another interview and go over it all over again with somebody, right? Sometimes you have to do that sort of thing, but you want to be there in the moment. You want to capture it the way it unfolds, because I think in things like documentary, that's really what matters, is being there and getting sound that matches that expression of revealing something or whatever it is for the very first time. So that's really all I had to say about, for my part, about sound, but I'm happy to take questions. Yes?
So, do you, if you're doing an interview, do you ever use just your Zoom mic, or
Yeah.
or you could do both, or you could do the interview?
Well,
with
we
the
often
Zoom?
plug into the camera, it depends. Sometimes the camera mic is used for safety, it's always on, so that for cutting, because the sound is separate from the picture that way. So we have one set of sort of good sound that I'm kind of responsible for, and also we work as a team. And generally, when we do documentary work, I ask the questions, and Kelly's behind the camera. And we have a little trick that we play on everybody, and it's really quite a simple little trick. When I run out of ideas and questions, I ask Kelly if she has questions. And you've got another person in the room, and then she, of course, has questions because she knows I've missed this or that. So she asks a few questions, and during that little interval, I have time to think about what I should have been thinking about, or to think up new questions, and then we carry the conversation on just a little bit further. So instead of just going in and hitting a brick wall and saying, well, I guess that's it, I've got an opportunity, playing with the camera operator who's there and has heard everything, giving her an opportunity to ask questions. So often I'm recording sound and doing the interviewing. So it just depends on the situation, how we set up the camera, what kind of interview it is. When it's sort of a face-to-face kind of thing, then I use the Zoom, and sometimes in some situations we don't use the Zoom at all. We just plug right into the camera, and I use the boom and maybe follow people around or that sort of thing. It just sort of depends on the situation. I can't think of when we've done one or the other right now, but it just depends.
And
Well,
then-
I was just gonna say, when we're using like our Canon 5D, right, an SLR, it
Right.
doesn't have like it has like a mini plug and that kind of thing, but we do it dual system. So the camera is just recording the sound, but it's just the camera sound. And then we would record it on the Zoom, and you need a syncing method. So the best way that we've done it is,
Well, we don't carry a clapperboard around.
Well,
we clap.
no,
Right?
but we do, it's better to bring a clapperboard.
Right, but
So,
depending on the situation, right? We have a clapperboard, I have all
Yeah.
that stuff. But if we're backpacking or whatever it is, right? Some things you can't bring along, so you improvise with the snapping of a finger or something like that to sync things up. But that's right, when we use that camera, we can't do sound, so sound has to be separate. When we use the camera at the back of the room, we can plug right into that camera as we are now, and we can use the Zoom for safety, because I have them, and once you have them, they don't cost anything to run. It's not like you have to put gasoline in them or something like that, right? So we do everything we can for safety's sake.
the most important thing that I've learned over the years with doing it is test out all of your equipment before you go out to shoot. Make sure that everything is working. If you're plugging into the camera, that you've got the right channel and all that kind of stuff. And that's where you get caught up, because you haven't tested it out. And I mean, you don't always have the chance, right? Because it's like last minute. You get permission that you can go and you run out the door with your equipment and you do your best. And then maybe you could talk about some of the strategies that we've had with when it didn't go so well and we have to or we want to record things to add sound, you know, like doing our own Foley and ADR and.
Well, we do all of that stuff too, right? So, you know, with a Zoom, it's very light and everything like that. So, you know what Foley is, right? That's making up sounds, right? So walking through the grass, you know, footsteps in the rain, coconuts for horses, those kinds of things. But we get to fool around with that. You always, when you're on wherever you are, you have to hope for a moment of silence from everyone around so that you can get some ambient sound. So that can be laid under the track. So you need, you know, 30 seconds or a minute of ambient sound. When you know, in your spare time, because you can buy sound effects, but you can get your own sound effects. So you know, a big thing around here are crows. So you can easily get them, and it's a way of, you know, practicing your sound taking techniques. But go out and get some crows in any backyard, generally about 6 o'clock in the morning. You can get them, and you know, you've got a little bank of those kinds of things. Not that you'll ever use them, but after you've shot something and you need something for fill, you go out and you figure out how to get it. Machinery, for example, right? Because sometimes you can't possibly conduct an interview, you know, with machines running and things like that. So you have to do things a bit differently, I suppose, and fake the fact that the machines are running in the background when you've shut everything off, or those kinds of things. So, you know, it's a question of planning, and as Kelly said, preparation for the shoot, so that things will go wrong. That's a given, and you have to be ready for the unexpected, right? Somebody that you're interviewing meets, you know, somebody they haven't seen in 30 years, and the moment is there, and you have to be able to turn your equipment on immediately. The camera might get on before you, but you've got to be in there, and you know, it always happens that, you know, we've got something and we've got to get it right then and there, and you have to be mobile. That's why I like the Zoom. It's simple, and you can put it in your back pocket. And we travel with weight restrictions on planes now. You can't bring anything on a plane, but you can still get those kinds of things on there and have, you know, great equipment no matter where you are. Yes, Keegan.
On the subject of ambient sound for recording, I think it's best to record the sound like after, when you have a, like for example, if you have a big crew member, if you have a huge crew set, it'd be best if everyone left and just take some time by yourself and grab your sound recorder and just record the ambient sound of a room, because you don't know what you expect. You don't know what to expect when you have crew members, because some could just be obnoxious and some they could just be goofing off, just laughing hysterically, just for no reason. I think it's best to like record sound by yourself with nobody around you, especially crew members, because it's aggravating, and I think it's kind of disrespectful too, because everybody wants to leave, because a lot of people record ambience the last second of the shoot, and people are just so aggravating just to record, just to interrupt the sound for no reason at all. And I think it's best to record sound like all by yourself.
Well, we recorded a docudrama out on Highway 61, and there must be a car going by there every 13 seconds. And we had a 20-second sequence. It was just a nightmare. We had so many takes trying to get away from the sounds of cars going by that aren't supposed to be there in 1929. And anyhow, it's complicated. And as you say, people working, the bigger the crew, the tougher it is. It's fun to work with 30 people and have all watch the magic of film unfold. But there are lots of subjects where you have to be on your own, and sometimes you just can't get that ambient sound, right? When you're asked to pack up and leave a place, as I've been, that you can't say, well, tell the security guards to wait a few minutes because I want to get some ambient sound. You take what you can get, right? So it depends what you're doing, but you're absolutely right, Keegan, and obviously you had that experience, and it's horrible because you need it later on, and you've got somebody that's telling a joke in the background, and you don't necessarily hear it on the set or when you're doing things, and then it ruins what you do have. So it's, you know, it's a very key element. Nicola, you had a question?
Well, yes, about the great mystery of Western, so that's what you do your own broadcast mastering thing, you have plugins for that. I know it takes lots of confidence, which I never had, so I'm always nervous with the mastering part. So how do you go broadcast?
We do some. I've got kids that have, you raise them, you know, from young, you train them up. I do use, locally, Danny Johnson has a wonderful studio.
Okay, so
and he does really good work for us. He's meticulous. And, you know, so depending on the budget, basically, and the availability of people, it used to be far more complicated than it is now. But because, you know, 20 years ago in the city, everything had to be shipped out of town. And it cost, you know, for onlines, it was just half your budget went to somebody in a studio in, you know, Winnipeg or Toronto or something. And now all that can be done, you know, on a laptop in a backseat of a car, essentially. So it's, you know, the whole thing has changed, right? From big equipment, big expensive equipment to cheap stuff that, you know, has the same quality. Never good enough for broadcasters, right? Right now they must be asking for 20K or something absolutely ridiculous, right? That nobody can, you wouldn't even, normal human beings would never notice the difference. But they're always asking for more, but for what I imagine most of you are doing is pretty straightforward.
Do you do any recording utilizing the community auditorium?
Well, I've been in there, I plugged into their board, you know, for concerts and things like that. So we do, like, you know, that's a different kind of situation. So there's somebody, you know, managing the soundboard, and it's just a feed out, and you know, I make sure that the levels don't exceed, you know, what my recording device allows. And we recorded Flamenco Caravan there,
right.
I think, and you know, maybe a few other things, or maybe we did that a couple
Yeah,
of times.
Danny's, oh no, the big band guy who passed away, and they did a,
Jim Curran, or is that his name?
yeah.
We used to see
Curran.
Curran.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
a
had like
tribute to
a
him,
tribute.
yeah.
It was
Anyhow,
amazing.
you know, you patch in, well, you know, when possible.
Yeah.
And we did a whole video, we had the Keith Richards of Finland came here once. And he performed with a lot of local performers, and we mixed a sort of, well,
Right, you had Ari Lottie Corky with you at that time, right?
yeah, Ari, you
Yeah,
know it.
Jukka Tolinen, when he
Oh,
came,
he-
Jukka
right,
Tolinen, yeah.
So if there's ever a nuclear holocaust, what's going to be left? Rats, cockroaches, Keith Richards, and Jukka Tolinen.
Of course.
Well, I was just gonna
Just
include a bit of my experience.
But Kelly's
Oh,
first.
sorry, no.
I just wondered what files, like what recording format is best for you, do you find? Is it do you have a choice with the Zoom, is it MP3?
Yeah, you have the choice, and it's set to MP3.
Yeah.
No,
So,
wave.
Is it a wave?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the wave files.
When you're taking that into post, like, is Wave
You don't
okay,
wanna
or-
do anything on MP3. MP3 is super
It's
compressed.
okay.
So Wave is your usual, or AIFF, like, but Wave is the standard for recording.
Okay.
But, well, what I was gonna say is that, because when I first started in film, you know, things were recorded double system always, and we're just going back to the same way. And documentary, to sync it up, they had like a little beep instead of and you just change a number, a piece of paper with a different number. And then my first job actually was syncing up the rushes, which is the picture and the sound, synchronizing them. And then one of my first jobs was as an assistant sound editor, where you would make all the tracks. And so, you know, when you're recording sound, you're just going to be recording for, in that situation locally, the best dialogue you can get. But that means that everything else is missing. So then it can be kind of, and you're trying to do it in the quietest possible location, but then that's not how real life is. So if then in the editing process you have to add all that back in. So I've done like a fair amount of my own sound editing after doing the picture editing, but that, it's the same way in that sound recording is always kind of marginalized. It's kind of like the last thing people think of, and as a director, I'm always like, I gotta get to the next location. You know, we've got all these people, and I don't wanna wait for the extra 2 minutes for everyone to shut up and listen and get the ambience. But anyway, regardless, you have to have your, you have to have someone who's like forceful to say, listen, if we don't get this, you are going to regret it. We will not fix it in post. You know, it's just, now is the moment to get that, and you never get enough of the extra stuff. You know, like the car door slam, or and even just the basic ambience track, so that, which is sort of changeable, so that when you're editing, you're taking out like minutes and minutes of time, and then the soundscape behind kind of changes, and it could change radically. You could have cars going by, ambulance or whatever, and then sometimes what you have to do is, because it would be noticeable, you might cover over visually that you've made a jump in the edit, but you have to, the best way to cover it over, even if you have like another image, and then behind that is a jump cut with the person talking, and they're saying something that they said, you know, 20 minutes later in real life, but you use sound to smooth that out, so it becomes not only seamless visually, but seamless in the background, in the audio. So that is like, it's an immense amount of work, the sound editing, to just take out all those little, you know, tiny little, like a half a breath, or any, just in the transitions between where you're cutting from one piece of sound, one statement, to another piece of sound. I don't know if you can sort of visualize it, but, and that's why you need all those things and little tricks. Like you could have like you know, a piece of dialogue over here, and then a piece of dialogue that was 20 minutes later, and then there was sort of an airplane going halfway through, didn't get finished, and then there was no airplane in the second chunk of sound. You put them together, and then it's really hard to get like, you know, the rest of the airplane sound, but maybe you put like a lawnmower or something in the distance to fudge it. Or people do one thing that I think is really crappy, but to fix up bad sound, they just plaster music from one end to the other, and you'll see all of those reality TV shows and everything. It's because to catch reality and things just happening, it means they end up with a ton of really horrible sound. So they just plaster it with just like wall-to-wall music that really adds nothing. So anyway, just speaking as from the director's point of view, and an editor's point of view, you know, the better, the cleaner the sound when you first record it, but then as many little extras that you can gather from the ambience in that location, so that, you know, you have a couple of crows, or you have something that you can then add in later to layer it up and make it feel like a real living soundscape. And then you have like, you spend like a whole year editing something, then you have like 2 weeks to do the sound edit to make it all beautiful at the end. That's typically what happens, right? Or you have none, and then you need the mixer, who is another.
I agree with you, but you know, I really tried in the last, last 3 years, as much as we have been experiencing, to give the time for that, you know, and to budget it accordingly. And especially when I was working here with the National Film Board, and they have really a very good sound system. When you go to Montreal for their old studios, really fantastic.
And they have a mix that's
not only the mix, the whole
Yeah.
prep for the mix, you know, and then it's their budget, right? And their people. So I really had extraordinary experience in at least 3 Canadian productions with the NFB that were like, the amount of time and budget that went to the sound was amazing. Like, you know, 3 weeks just sound editing.
Mhm.
and then another 10 days for mix. What can you think about it,
Yeah.
So that's really the old world.
Well, yeah, because, and they
NFB
cut those
in Montreal
budgets.
still have the
Yeah.
huge studios, but the way they're going to change it, they're building a new building, and they're going to scale down the whole production house. Everything in Montreal is shrinking, but it was amazing. But even in smaller production, even in VR, like in the the more things that go into the web, then of course it changes because so it's a bit different, I would say, when you do something that goes to the web, but we still invest into it. We still invest into it. I mean, what I believe that's besides what I just talked, I think that the same time and even effort and creativity that we put in image, we shouldn't neglect the sound, because it's such a big part of the experience. So it goes also with dividing your resources. So that's, but that's
yeah.
my 2 cents about it, because sometimes if you just close your eyes and listen, it's such an experience, and if you don't invest into it, creativity and time sometimes, we miss it.
I'd also like to just add a little something to Kelly, and that's another thing that I do. Sometimes I forget to turn off the record, so I'm just recording us walking around and having lunch and things. That happens. But generally, while people are setting up,
Or arguing.
while people are, you're getting ready for the interview or whatever it is, I record what's going on. Sometimes, it's as easy as sort of leaning out the window and recording what's on the street, and getting, that kind of sound, because you're there. There's nothing to it. And often in interview situations, you're having a conversation, and people will say things that are off camera, but that doesn't mean they have to be off mic as well. So I often find myself sort of warming them up while Kelly's adjusting, and the lights are going on, and talking to people, and depending on the circumstance, it's not to trick people or anything like that. It's just, if it's there and the microphone is on them, it costs nothing for me to record our conversation, and often those little sentences can be used later on in the production, or that sound of the kids playing next door can be used somehow in the production, because they're going to, if it's kids, they're going to be screaming no matter what, so you might as well get good sound and work with it.
No.
You're transcribing it?
No, I use the editing software for, because I'm an editor, I've done on things where they spend a lot of money transcribing, but it's, maybe it's the old school method that I was trained as sorry, doing your own webcasting. Anyway, so because the nonlinear editing process and the way that I organize the footage, especially if you have projects with a lot of interviews, sometimes if you have a bit of extra money, you could get someone to transcribe them. But what I do instead is I go from the old school way of organizing my material, where I listen to I keep the whole interview in one timeline, and I duplicate it, and then I just cut out every single thing that's usable, that is good, and then what I can do is I can then organize those clips thematically on another timeline. It's just because you can have like the timeline is just kind of like your edit, right? So you can just have it's like, say you started with a Word document and you had like 10 pages of it, but then you could just cut out all of your favorite bits and make that into a shorter document, and then you could take those chunks and you could make a sequence that was just thematically. And so I would go through each interview and then cut out all the best, sort of winnowing it down, and then say I had 10 different interviews, each one would be winnowed down. So I don't need to, because I can always go back to it. So the more you work with it, the more you listen. But one thing that I found was, because I've known directors who weren't editors, and they would ask for transcripts, and then they would like suggest editing, suggest clips and everything from what they were reading. And that has nothing to do with what makes a good moment in a film or storytelling. So it was useless. It was like and then they would, if you worked with them as an editor, like they just wanted you to push buttons and here, give me this from this time code to this time code and put them in a string. That's not, like I learned from the old timers who were editing on film. So you had to have like a method and a process. And so then you had to trust the process of winnowing it down into, you know, the most powerful bits. And then really the only time that you really know which is the most powerful bit, which it's like over 30 years as an editor, the first time you watch that footage is the only time that you are going to be sharing the same experience as your audience will. So you will know every single time. And then there's lots of times people, they would fall in love with, they read it. Oh, it was in the transcript and they said this. And it's like, no, that did nothing for me when I heard it. And then you'll try to shoehorn it in. Oh, we must say this in the film. And then no. But it was that moment where they talked about how they felt when their dog died, that had emotion, and they said it in a way that all people would like immediately start listening and relate. That is a moment, it's always the same moment that is going to be in the film.
Do you write it on the piece itself, or do you use
No, sometimes I would just make, I always edit structurally by theme. So I now don't write anything. But I have a memory, like, so it's more of an audio memory of those, of what those points are.
And you don't write on the scene itself, like you don't write yourself?
Sometimes I would do that, like if it was just so that I could quickly, but because, especially with nonlinear software, if you create these timelines, you can instantly zip back, like you know they talked about this there or whatever, and then especially if you
code it with the name already.
I don't know, I don't code it. I
not code, like when you save it, you save it with a certain name.
Yeah, well, what I do is I create. So first of all, I take the interview, I cut out all of the boring bits, and so then what I do is I make another sequence that whenever that person talks about their dog dying, I just put that little clip into that sequence. So it's by thematic. Yeah. So then if 5 people, they were all talking about their dog dying, then I would have the sequence would be dog dying. And then it would be like another sequence, it would be when I got my first dog. And then it was and then you can always go back and find it.
So what you're actually saying, that's actually interesting, is like the way that you are saving stuff is actually your memory.
Yeah.
And the organization.
Yeah.
So so the tool is also what you have.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm always like,
sense.
but I don't lose anything, because especially when I was working with directors, they're always like, well, if we don't put this in, then we'll forget about it and all that. But the reason because I always duplicate, and then so there's the one where there's like the 10 best clips of that person's interview. But then I duplicate it, and then I go through and I go, well, no, this person said it better, and then I have the top 5 clips. Then I have, then I make another sequence that is just the one good clip that person said about the dying dog. And then, so anyway, so you end up with like a lot of.
Is actually your memory.
I think so. Well, yeah. but it's because it's. But you clean out all the extraneous and you just get it down to less and less material. but just the good bits. And then I don't worry about structure. It's just organizing them thematically,
Yeah.
first by what's interesting and then thematically. And then you find out that really the film that you're gonna make about is what happened, you know, when the dog died, and you didn't really need to know about what kind of breed it was and all the agonizing that they went into, whether when they were picking their dog, all that kind of, you know what I mean? It's just,
You're actually creating the structure by your interaction.
so
with the
then
material.
your film is created on your material. It is not created in what you wanted to do, it's what you have.
It's very interesting because, you know, because you're coming from editing, but you're also directing. So it's very interesting because that's also my instinct in a way, but you know, and many directors are not like that. I know that.
Well, no, there's some people that's like, I need to make this point, it has to be made.
Because you know, they
You're
still have in
finding
their
it rather
mind.
than forcing it. into
Right.
No, but it's also they have in their mind a vision that is not there, you know?
Yeah.
That happens a lot in the editing room. And I sit as a producer sitting sometimes with the editor and the director. And the editor has, this is the material, that's what we have to work from. And the director has his vision in the head that it's not there, you know? So then you have a kind of interesting dialogue that leads many times, you know, I know because I was a little bit between the two to help it a little bit, you know, come together, but, yeah.
So I'll just point out that we worked on films together and we were still married.
That's great.
The other thing I'll point out is that you know, of course, Manfred Becker.
Yeah.
You heard it here, he's an old timer, so next time you talk to Manfred, please tell him that Kelly is telling people that he is an old timer.
No, not old timer, old school.
Old school, okay, I'm sorry.
I know. Manfred is really a great editor, and he's really also directing a lot today, you know? He's more directing than editing actually. And, yeah, there's some great things about the way he works, you know. Myself as a producer, I'm sitting with the editors. I did it all the films I was involved in, and watching all the rushes with the editors. I do it as a producer, you know. And I make some notes, but not like crazily. And then I saw all the rushes because I'm not a lot all the time with the shoot, right? And then we're sitting on a rough cut and there's something, and suddenly I remember something that they forgot about, right? Because I saw everything. So that's something that I think, you know, whoever involved in the production is a creative producer or another eye to two people or one person sometimes, which is director, editor, can remind some things that are important for everybody but we forgot about, or it was forgotten on the side.
And that's exactly why you can't make a film on your own. It's teamwork all the time. You know, you have to have faith in sound people, but you have to have faith in everybody doing their job and coming together as a team and contributing what they can contribute to the project. Because trying it on your own, people do it, but whenever you see credits, you know, camera, sound, editing, everything, acting, you know, generally those films don't work as well as one that pulls in everybody's best skills and puts them together.
And also having the same vision for it, because it's not only skills, but it's do we have in our vision, our imagination, are we aiming for the same thing? And it's sometimes work when people are either sure about having enough discussed things before or they know enough each other's, and sometimes it's not, right? So.
I'd just add something
Question?
of
At the back, the
having,
young lady at the back.
like someone making their first documentary, you end up with an overwhelming amount of material. What I've done in the past, where I, you know, had to really keep a record of all the content, is something similar to your process, where I would organize things by theme, but also maybe have a bit of a paper edit where you might summarize content and sort of anchor it to time code points, because ultimately you're going to be using time code as a way of finding things again when you've got like half an hour, you know, a long tape, maybe say for some reason you let somebody talk for that long. And does the Zoom, it records time code as well? So you're always kind of, on a technical level, you know, going back to those points. You can always find things again if you get lost, and maybe not to transcribe word for word, but sort of every 5 minutes or so of an interview, maybe to notate, you know, where the conversation had gone at that point, just as a simple way of
Well,
staying on track.
Yeah, well, there is, well, and that's what I mean by, because I don't ever record like the time code as a sync tool with the digitally now. But once you put it, you take all your raw material, but once you put it as a sequence, it has a time code. It has a time and a location, and then so that you can always go back and, but yeah, like for the original. Yeah.
I'll talk more about maybe a bit about if you don't have a mic on you, what are other techniques that you can use to record sound and a better sound? So I've been in a situation where I didn't have any any microphone with me. So the idea is to put your camera as close to your subject as possible, so you can get a better sound. So instead of if you are here and if you're zoomed in, try to zoom out and place your camera as near to your subject as you can. So the more the distance is less, you'll get a better sound of your camera. The other technique is to use, if you have your phone, or if you have some kind of computer or iPad or any kind of recording device. You can use it, they can hide it somewhere with your subject, or it could be near them. You can use that as a backup or some kind of. And then a really good software, open source free, is called Audacity, Audiciti. You can
Yep.
and then, yeah. So that's for sound recording. It's for editing and for mixing. It's a very good one.
Seems to, I think we've killed the battery, no.
Just as a 2-second exercise,
Yeah.
if you had to do an interview right now in this room, there's an incredible
This one
amount
right
of
here?
sound
Yeah.
in here, you know, I'm hearing high-pitched sounds, and if you had to come back to the same interview half an hour later, all the sound that was out here a while back is gone now. So you've had just in no sound, a whole variety of sounds that, you know, you may have to match in room tone at some point, so.
Well, and all the people that are out listening right now, like this just has a little microphone on it. I haven't listened to it yet. I don't know how horrible it is or how good it is, but, you know, maybe Mary will write in and tell us. She probably is getting seasick every time I move the camera. Sorry about that. But we will be editing these. So I was thinking that maybe we should wrap up now, but what we should do is we have time to maybe create our groups, so we can start talking about the what productions that we're going to make over the next couple of days, and so then maybe we can. So we can just stop the streaming, and then we can just break into groups. And we've had a few ideas, and then we can just sort of see who's interested in doing what. Because I think we could have at least 4 teams. I think we could have 4 teams, or maybe we just have 3 teams of people working on these projects. So anyway, so I think we can sign off unless you had something more.
I think that.
Oh, here's Audacity.
Unless there's another question or something, but this is the program that we has told us about, and you said it's free?
It's open source.
Open source.
So both. And it's a class platform, and it's audio software, and it's for multi-track recording and editing.
Okay.
So I just want to say that I'm leaving tomorrow very early in the morning, so it was nice meeting everybody, and if somebody wants to ask me anything in private or now, that's the time. So anyway, it was great meeting you.
Okay, thanks.